I think the biggest question we always get is self-managing or getting a property manager. Aaron, maybe you can start us off with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I don't want to go too deep because maybe we go around the horn a little bit and get our overall take on it, and then we can dig into some of the stories. But essentially, this is one of the first kind of fork in the road decisions that someone has to make when they actually buy a property, whether it's in their backyard or across the country. You still have to make that decision at some point. For someone like me, I barely want to hang up pictures in my house. So I know for a fact that I'm not handy, and even if a property was on my street, I probably wouldn't be managing it. But with that said, self-managing means something different to different people. Some people think that means that you're the one swinging the hammer and doing all the repairs and everything. And I have a different definition of self-management, right? To me, it just means that you're circumventing hiring a third party property manager, and you're going to handle all the administration, tenant relations, and all that type of stuff yourself. So with that kind of definition in mind, my wife and I, we own 8 rentals across 3 states, the closest of which is 1,000 miles away. And this conversation is very timely for us because up until about 4 months ago, we were self-managing 6 out of the 8. And we've had most of them for almost 5 years now. 5 years are over. So as we go throughout this discussion, I'll explain what made us shift from self-managing for almost 5 years to actually bringing on property managers in those markets. But in short, I do believe that the skill of self-management and learning how to do that, whether it's in your backyard or afar, is something that every investor should at least learn about, whether or not they choose to do it or not. So that's my short take. Would love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, I agree with you there that I view self-management more as the almost the project manager or the general contractor for everything. And when I bought my first property, I went in with the idea of self-management and everything. I got the right group in control. I got the right people, and I have no problems talking with tenants. So I was like, oh, easy, no problem. But for me, where I went to the property management route was the 2 a.m., 4 a.m. calls where the heating's out, and then calling the company saying, hey, this is out, and getting a lot of grumbling and everything. I was like, okay, this is where it went into. And then also I'm really meticulous about finances and everything, making sure it's all there, but then having a group right there also for collections and everything, that really helps a lot. So that's how I went.
I think that's one of the biggest questions I always get is whether, some people look at it because we all follow Zuber and we also all listen to Lumberjack. And he always talks about how your property manager is making a lot more money or making more money than you are in a sense. So I think that always gets a lot of people thinking about whether they should self-manage or hire a property manager. And I think my quick and easy take on it is I wouldn't self-manage from a distance initially. That would be my short answer to it. So right now I'm hybriding things. I'm doing a little bit of both. I do have a property manager and I do self-manage, but I also think Aaron has a great, mighty community that is focused on this. But yeah, for you, Harrison, was that always your thought initially? Were you just going to always get a property manager from the get-go?
No, yeah. And I'm actually also in Aaron's Academy too. I highly recommend it. Getting back to your question, Mark, I actually thought I was going to be self-managing the whole time. It was just one of those where I think with this being my first rental, I went in a little too gung-ho, but it's been able to pull back a little bit. And thankfully, my property manager, they're actually teaching me on what they do. And so they're saying, this is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing it. And I think for me, because I also have inherited tenants, I really didn't know how to really work with them in the beginning. I was very empathetic, very willing to work with them, but also being able to provide that for no means no in this situation. So yeah, and doing that multiple times, I think that gets a little tiring. And so having the property manager for right now really helps. And that's my goal anyway for maybe the next property I'm going to self-manage, or if I bought one in Virginia, I'm definitely self-managing because I like fixing stuff up. That's actually not too bad for me, but it's just more of the rent collections. That's where I need to really build my strength on.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing I have is you really have to know yourself though. to me, there's just some people, no matter how much it may make financial sense or it makes sense to self-manage, a lot of people, I think, just don't have the maybe demeanor or I guess maybe mindset to self-manage. And especially if you have a super busy W-2, right? You don't want to be dealing with a lot of those things. And I think ultimately that's the goal for a lot of people though. Cause like you look at, like we said, we all follow the same community, like Zuber, Dion, Lumberjack. They all have a different perspective on it, right? Like Zuber has a property manager. He doesn't want to deal with it, right? He doesn't want to deal with any of these things. And I'm sure Dion and Lumberjack are always trying to tell him, man, you know how much money you'd save if you just self-manage on your own. So I think a lot of it too is what other goals you have in mind. But I think the biggest thing, and I think Aaron, you can touch on this too, is I think you just learn a lot though by self-managing. And that's part of the importance of it.
100%. Yeah, I think there's a few different kind of ways to slice it, but I said earlier, like the skill of self-managing, I think is something everyone should have. And what that means that you don't necessarily have to actually manage your property, but you need to learn about all the different components of what it means to manage a property. So tenant screening, how to actually set expectations properly. You want to understand your lease, even if a property manager is the one providing it to you. You want to make sure you understand your landlord tenant laws and at least the main lease provisions. You don't want to get trapped in a situation where you think you have leverage in a certain situation, but the lease says something different. So you want to become literate in all these concepts so that you can, be informed and not have any types of false sense of security or anything like that. You also want it to be a check and balance. So when you do work with a property manager, you know what it looks like to do a good job and do a bad job. I always think of it this way. If you're a buy and hold investor and your goal is to hold your properties for decades, the chances that the initial property manager that you hire is going to just magically be there for decades without retiring or the company growing too much or the company shutting down, very low. So at some point, you're probably going to have to make a transition. Even if you have a golden 10-year stretch with that property manager, at some point, as with everything in life, it will come to an end. And so you might have a period of time where you need to take it over for a short period, or you need to make a transition, and just having that knowledge and knowing what to look for, I think every investor can stand to learn. And one of the best books I read that is a really easy read that helped with this mindset was Brandon Turner's, I think it's called The Book on Property Management. And he does a really good job of just trying to tool your mindset to think more like a manager. And one very self-admitted weakness of mine is I generally want to be everyone's friend. And that applies to my tenants too. And that actually makes me bad at self-managing. And that's part of the reason, again, we'll unpack why I made the switch, but I have a really hard time separating the personal element from the business element. And if somebody asks for help, I tend to want to give it to them, whether or not, unfortunately, sometimes people ask for help. And when they see that you're willing to give it, they'll push and take more. And it's me trying to be empathetic or supportive or compassionate can oftentimes backfire. And I think there's a balance, there's a dial, and you want to be in the right spot. You want to be a compassionate landlord. You want to give people a good place to live and treat it, make it feel like they're home without them walking all over you. So I think that's the nuance and the difficult balance of it.
I think, Aaron, that's a great point. I think that's why I'm doing like a hybrid style also, because that was my concern, because the property manager that I do work with, the primary one, is great, but he also flips homes on the side and he has other things that he's working on. So I was always concerned, like, man, what if he gets too big on the flipping side and then he starts either losing focus on my properties or he just starts veering towards that as his primary business. So that's also why I want to get into the self-managing and hybrid a little bit. So like you're saying, if an emergency did come up and I had to take over my portfolio, I'm not going in completely blind or having to just hire the next property manager that's willing to take on my properties, and then I'm in a bad situation. But yeah, let's see. What else can we talk about on this topic?
Following up with that too, is that the scariest thing for me was actually coming up with the long-term contract. I was making sure that I had everything there, wanted to get signed off. I was like, oh, this could be bad. So that was another reason why I went with the property management, because they had something that was locked in, dialed in, ready to go. I was just like, oh, okay, it's another thing that helps you sleep at night. And that was, Aaron, I follow along with you is that I'm trying to empathize, work with them, but then you're realizing that some tenants, they might want to take advantage of that. And that was something that I knew right away. I was like, okay, let's make the first few years maybe property management and then go from there.
It's also a scalability thing, right? Like I think when
Yeah.
you have a handful, let's say 4 or under, especially if you're in the same market, typically, even if you have a job, even if you have a family, if you have good systems, you can handle that capacity because it's not overwhelming. That's not that many people or different situations to look after. But part of what ended up making us make the transition is we have 8 properties across 3 states. So there's not only 8 structures, each structure has its own capital expenses, it has its own appliances, it has its own people. Each of those people have their own life stories and scenarios and backgrounds. It's a lot of different situations to manage simultaneously. And sometimes there would be, I think the record I set without having any repair requests while I was self-managing was 6 months, where I basically didn't hear anything for 6 months. And then naturally, as you would expect, the following month, there were 5 houses that had problems within a 7-day stretch, right? So there is a capacity thing where you get this false sense of security that because something hasn't happened for a while, oh yeah, I can keep self-managing. It's totally easy. But then inevitably things, especially the more houses you have, the more likely it is that something goes wrong at one or even multiple. And when multiple go wrong at the same time and you're in the middle of a work day or you're with your kids, it's not only literally disruptive, but it is mentally and emotionally disruptive too, because it pulls you away from things that, at least in my life recently, my priorities have shifted much more towards protecting that time. And that's why I was ultimately willing to shift and cede control from self-management over to property management. The other thing on the personal front is I have a 3-year-old daughter and I have 1-year-old twins. And during both of those births in the hospital, I had quote unquote emergency situations at one of our rentals, separate rentals, but both involved me taking phone calls moments before and moments after the birth of my children. And if you think about that's messed up. It was choice. We knew self-managing that we were responsible for taking care of these things, no matter when they occurred. But that's just symbolic that you're in the hospital enjoying one of these magical moments. And I was still able to enjoy the moments, but you think about that and you extrapolate that and you say, okay, do I really want this stuff infringing that deeply into my personal life? Or do I want to create a little more guardrails and barriers? So those are just like a few little anecdotes of where my shift has come from in the last year.
That's a great point because, yeah, I have a baby due within the next week. So it's like the idea of having to take phone calls while in the delivery room or something like that. Yeah, that's another good point. That's peace of mind right there.
Frank did make a good point here. Where was his quote? He said, here we go. He said he interviewed a property manager the other day, and he actually said he sold his properties because it felt like a conflict of interest. And some of his clients might think he was taking care of theirs. Yeah, that's an interesting point too. I think even sometimes when you're a realtor and you deal with clients, and I think that's why sometimes realtors use that as a reason why they don't have investment properties, because they're like, it's like a conflict of interest. Am I providing the best service when it's a property that I should be investing in maybe? Have you ever dealt with that? Any of your property managers saying they don't invest or they sold off their properties for those reasons?
I'm actually the opposite. I like the idea of having someone who owns properties because they actually focus it. Like basically my property manager is a group of people that just got together, said, hey, we have a bunch of properties. Let's kind of get the biggest bang for our buck for fixes and everything. And I was like, yeah, this is a great plan. And they've been on top of everything. So I'm actually on the opposite side of that property manager.
Yeah, I don't think I've faced that exact scenario, but I generally like the real estate professionals that I work with to be investors themselves as well, because they actually have that experience. They don't necessarily have skin in the game on my house, but they have skin in the game on a house or multiple. And so they know what it feels like to go through a bad event or have something mismanaged that costs a bunch of money. They, again, back to that empathy, they can understand that feeling. And therefore, I think there's probably a bigger incentive to avoid. Unfortunately, like on this topic of property managers in general, I think the business model itself is a bit broken because you have these kind of mom and pop upstart property managers that maybe they manage a couple dozen. And usually those type of people provide really good service because they have a small portfolio and maybe they manage a handful of their own units and then they take on 2 or 3 other investors. So I've worked with people that size and I actually tend to have a better experience with the smaller management. The problem is those situations rarely last very long because they'll either scale their business and take on more and more units to make it worth their while. And then they become too busy and then they have to hire people, which then increases their costs. And then they have to scale more and then they have to hire more people. And all of a sudden the quality of the service you got when it was just you and a couple other investors is out the window, unless they're really good at growing and scaling companies, which I hate to say it, but most property managers are not. That's not the skill set that they were graced from the heavens with, right? Usually they're good at fixing problems in a pinch and maybe dealing with tenants and putting on that business face. But like growing and scaling a company to manage hundreds of units is a different skill entirely. And I don't believe that most property managers are very good at that. I'd say my hit rate on finding a good property manager that I actually enjoy working with and believe that they're going to have a long shelf life, pretty small percentage, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Let's see. Kyle has I don't know if not really a question, but maybe his view on it. But he says self-managing in pro-tenant versus pro-landlord state seems like it could sway a decision. And then All-Nighter Hider just has his viewpoint on it. Says he would actually have less trust in a property manager in a tenant-friendly state. He would want all the control there. But Hider also wants to clarify that he's also studied law, so maybe that's why he feels more comfortable in that sense. But what's your guys' take on that? Do you think it matters what type of where you invest as far as tenant or landlord-friendly state?
So I own on both ends of the spectrum. Iowa and Nevada are pretty landlord friendly. And then I also own property in Washington, which is one of the most tenant friendly states. And I'm not in Seattle area, so Washington state regulations are pretty strict. And then Seattle has their own overlays on top of that are even more strict. And these are the type of stories in Bigger Pockets articles about people it taking 8 months to get somebody out. And there's almost no circumstances in which you can actually evict somebody. If they have any type of legal counsel, there's lots of companies that will provide free legal counsel to tenants on how they can stay in properties, even if they're not paying. I mean, these scenarios are real. It's not a bunch of, what do you call it? Fear mongering, right? Like these scenarios are actually possible in those type of states. And for all those reasons, and I have not studied law, I don't think I would want to self-manage in those situations. I'll just like one other small example. In Washington, if a fixed term lease ends, so if somebody's on a 12-month lease and then it reverts to month, once you get to month, they actually have way more protections under Washington state law than if they were on a term lease. Like these are things that we learned, thankfully without major consequence, but we learned this because we had a hard time getting somebody out when they were on a month-to-month lease and we wanted to move on. And so these are lessons that, yes, we're learning as we go, but a good property manager and somebody who actually understands the local rules and regulations and they understand the eviction process. I almost actually think of a property manager more as an insurance policy against these bad situations than I do as someone that I really need on a daily basis. If all I'm doing is taking a few phone calls, collecting rent, calling a vendor here and there, I could do that. I don't need a property manager for that. But where I do feel like I need them is for emergencies or evictions or things that are going to involve repeated presence. So I don't know, like I'm of the mind that I would rather engage with a property manager in these complex situations than step away from it.
Yeah, I follow up with that. That's why we didn't buy in Oregon, because it was the same thing. It was that we were renters there, and then we realized that, as if we went month to month, it's a little bit more expensive, but somehow we could potentially get our way out of it. But we were the honest rentees and everything, so we just wanted to make sure that. But it did make it obvious that it's okay. We're not going to buy here, so we're going back to Virginia. But yeah, that's a good point, Aaron.
I have one more like kind of nugget I'll add, right? So I at one point ran an analysis on, our Vegas properties. We self-managed them up until quite literally just a couple of months ago. So about 5 years total of self-managing. And I ran the math on how much money did we save on management fees? And it was upwards of, I think it was $32,000 total, which is not that much over 5 years, but it's also not nothing. And what I want to share though, is that is a deceptive figure to say that, you just saved $32,000, because there also undoubtedly was cost. If a really good property manager was in there being really proactive about preventative maintenance and tracking all the CapEx and being more proactive than we were, arguably we would have spent less on repairs and maintenance and CapEx. So I do think that there's like the 32K, and then somewhere in the middle is where it really is as far as saving, because we certainly cost ourselves money by choosing to self-manage, and we are not the best self-managers. We could do it. That's what I fall back on. Like, we have the skill, we can do it, we can survive, we can still run a profitable portfolio, but definitely not as well as a professional who is actually really good at it. So I think that's one, thing I'll add. Second is like really doubling on what I said a minute ago. Emergencies and like extraordinary circumstances are when you really, like, the property manager to me is more of an insurance policy for those situations. 2 times over the last 7 months, there was a homeless encampment in the lot behind one of our rentals, and they lit fires that burned down the fence into our yard. And in the first scenario, we were self-managing, and it was, I think, I want to say it was July 3rd or something. So it was the holiday weekend leading. So it was a weekend and a holiday, and we're self-managing. We didn't have a property manager at the time. So just having to deal with that like emergency situation, that's 2 hours before a different time zone. And so basically all morning I was trying to figure out frantically how to contact these different vendors and leverage like different relationships that we had in Vegas. It's not like I spent 8 hours straight on it, but it became this burden for basically 3 to 4 days of resolving this and getting our tenants feeling safe and secure. That same situation happened 3 days ago, unfortunately, the same lot. This time we have a property manager. We were still involved, but we were able to divide and conquer. Our property manager was very proactive, actually went to a community meeting, met with the local police, and they were able to do all this stuff on the ground to address the longer term issue of that vacant lot and the homeless encampment, and a lot of stuff that we just simply can't do from Houston. And so I just like that, try and paint a picture of same scenario, but 2 different setups, and how one was much easier to go through than the other.
Well. We have the famous Ned here popping in. So thanks for joining us today, man. If you had any input on self-managing or property managing work, if you want to throw in your 2 cents, or if you had any experience with it.
So I've always done kind of a hybrid, since most of my properties, especially the beginning, were house hacks. So I always self-managed when I lived in it, just to get to know a property and how the expenses were. So I knew what the water bills normally were. I knew what electric normally was, or, hey, these parts of the houses have issues. And I got to know it that way. And then after I'd gotten a good feel for it, then I felt comfortable letting someone else manage it. Just so, I don't know. That was the way I always did it. I always self-managed initially, and then I'd hand it off. That way I didn't have to necessarily cross my fingers and hope that a property manager was telling me the truth on every side. It made it easier to manage the manager.
Very good point. But yeah, let's maybe move on a little bit. Let's see. So I am going to share this one right now. So this is a one that I saw on X, Steve Millionaire. He has a big following on there. And I think his message is, I've learned over the years that things are never as easy or as difficult as you make them out. So you guys find that true, or what's your guys' thoughts on that?
I do. I think the concept there is basically, it's usually a combination of like anxiety and analysis paralysis, where most people spend too much time in their own head stewing over what the right or wrong decision is, versus actually taking any type of action and getting feedback from the world. No matter what you do, whether you're building a product or finding a tenant or trying to buy a house, it's all about putting things out there into the world and seeing what the reaction you get back is. Now, of course, you want to be careful, you want to be methodical, but I do fully agree that most people are good at thinking about things, and there's not as many people that do the things that they think about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. It's the follow through that's always the hardest part. And that's something where I know I do very well just jumping into the deep end for just getting work done. But sometimes when it comes to planning, that's actually where I get my analysis paralysis. If I'm overthinking of what if this happens, that happens, this happens. But sometimes I just open the door, say, I don't care, let's go for it. That's something I've had to learn as, I don't know, someone who's a little bit more cautious. Is just open the door. Sometimes it's just, you don't know what's going to happen, but something good might happen.
Ned, before you hopped on, we were talking about how you had to deal with a lot of struggles. Do you think that kind of maybe prepared you for perspective on things in a sense? Like maybe that was, I would assume that's might have been the most challenging thing for you to deal with.
You talking about my brain surgery or?
Yes. Well, like I said, I'm hoping that's probably the most difficult thing you had to go through. But if not, there's a lot more we need to talk about there.
Yeah, I don't know. I got lucky, whereas I always, whether it's business or like personal life challenges like that, I've always kind of viewed the people around me as like, you want to make sure that those people are a good team, whether that's for moral or spiritual or business support or whatever. And I mean, I think you've heard me tell the story before, but one of my favorite stories to go over, and it's shaped the way I go about things, is when I got out of my brain surgery. I remember laying there, and the first thing I thought of was that scene in Kill Bill where she's laying there and she can like, she's like, all right, just move your big toe. And when I woke up, I like couldn't move anything. And I looked down and I was like, I wonder if I could wiggle. This is Kill Bill. And so I got to where I could wiggle my toe. And then within an hour or two, that they had me like trying to go down the hall with a walker. I'd learned how to walk, talk, do almost everything all over again. And I couldn't remember how to do math. Which is weird. I could look at like math equations and tell you the answer, but I couldn't tell you why. So there's like a bunch of weird neurological stuff that didn't make any sense at the time, but it was, looking back on it, it was, I guess you'd call it a formative experience. And when I was leaving the hospital, case in point, the doctor said, hey, whenever you go to grab food or go watch TV or go to the bathroom, try and move more this time than you did last time. But I misheard him. And I thought he said move twice as much. And in my head, I was like, well, that's going to be a lot after a week or so. And so I remember I got home. I didn't question it because I was like, he's the doctor. He must know, not realizing I misheard him. And I remember going like, all right, got to go to the bathroom. First time, second time I went to the bathroom, literally to the bathroom, back to the bed, to the bathroom. And then I was like, all right, now I can. And y'all could see how over about a week, this got a little out of control. It got to where I was like, man, I got to go to the bathroom. I don't want to walk around the block. And at the time I lived like basically across the street from a park. So I went downstairs and I got to where there was like a golf course, and I would walk to the end of the 18th hole and then back into the house to grab food from the kitchen. And eventually within 2 or 3 weeks got to where I'd walk around the hole. And the thing was, is like, I just stupidly, but also my wife, who's a physical therapist, came back and she's like, the thing you need to do to recoup or get better at things is just volume when you're trying to relearn how to use stuff. And so I just stubbornly pushed ahead. And I remember getting back to the doctor for my like 1 month or anywhere from 2 to 4 week checkup. The doctor was like, how is he getting around the house? And I was like, I hate to say it, but I got to where it was just too much work. So I started, instead of just doubling the amount, my 1 mile run is like 14 minutes instead of back at like 9 where it used to be. And he was like, what? So super not advised, not medical advice, don't do that. But I learned that if you just put the effort in, that a lot of times it'll pay off. And the thing I've learned with my businesses after that is the shiny thing syndrome kind of kills us all. So it's better to just stupidly go forward at your one mission, which in my case was like go twice as far as you did last time, versus every business I've had that started to work where I was like, cool, now that this is working, let's do this other thing. Now just do more of the thing that is giving you the best feedback and the best improvements. And it's boring, but honestly, that's where I'm at with real estate now. I keep having ideas of, it'd be cool if I get into self-storage. What about short-term rentals? What about, there's so many things you could do where the thing that we're all doing is probably working. If you just did that again 70 more times or 5 more times or 2 more times or whatever your number is, yeah, it's going to be the same thing. It's like monotonous. It's just, that's the hardest part for me as a business operator at this point, is realizing it's, hey, if I just do 1 more rental, like I'm not going to be big enough to affect the whole market unless I'm in like a tiny rural town. But I don't know. It feels boring, but it's okay. I feel like not enough people talk about how it's okay to just do the same thing again. It doesn't need to be the newest Instagram or TikTok or whatever trend. Just do it again.
Would you say it's maybe more of a completionist in that way?
Yeah, if I play a video game, I want all the achievements. But yeah, I've always been a completionist. Just do the thing, get it optimized, and then go do another one. And honestly, if you do that, you're going to be better each time. Then definitely, you're not going to figure out the code, because I thought I had my neighborhood figured out. Then Ida hit, and suddenly insurance rates change, and the whole market that I was super used to in New Orleans was suddenly not the same market anymore, just because one factor changed, which messed everything up.
Well, we got some, I don't know if I'm saying it right, and I think we got Francois from X. And I think this is I didn't really realize it, because I'm not sure, because before you couldn't share it, but he did post something on X. So I'll share it here. And he's just what we're talking about too, is growing revenue rather than growing your portfolio is a great message. And I think that kind of relates back to even like the self-managing or property manager, sometimes just becoming more efficient. And instead of, you don't have to scale much bigger, but if maybe you take over self-managing and become more efficient, and now that's how you're going to increase revenue. And I don't know if that's why you mentioned short-term rentals, Ned, but in his kind of question or comment, he does mention short-term rentals are a great way to maximize revenue. But we also got VT, the big bad beard here. I think I've seen him here last week, but thanks for stopping by. Perfection is the enemy of good enough, Ned. That's what he said.
See, I kind of challenge that sometimes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your story, Ned, because a year and a half ago, I had cancer, and I actually did my midway scan like halfway through. All growths were gone. Everything was great. I was like, excellent. We can finish early. Don't call me, doc. I'll call you. He said before I walked out, but no, you need to do the whole treatment, because it may not show up, but it could still come back really fast. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need to do that completion to make sure that it's gone. Good enough, I agree. It's for a lot of things, but for sometimes, especially with real estate, I'm like, I'm not going to do a project halfway or just good enough. I want to make sure that it's over-engineered and fixed so that I don't have to worry about it. Like Aaron was saying, I don't want to have to keep coming back to this. I want it to be done, and at least for a while, I don't have to worry about it.
I think that's why a lot of people have reached out to me about Aaron's remote real estate academy, is because they see Aaron in the school community or even posting things on social media. He's very detail oriented, and I don't know if perfectionist is the right way to put it, but I think they'd like his systems that he has in place. So I think that's why they're very interested in the remote real estate academy, because that's what they're trying to get more efficient at, is their systems. And is that kind of the things that people can find in the academy, Aaron?
Yeah, I appreciate that shout out, Mark. Yeah, I think I was mentioning at the beginning of this question, there's like a dial. On one side, you have bias for action and people who have no problem getting out there and trying stuff, even if it's not fully baked. And then on the other side, you have this kind of analysis paralysis where you just keep searching for information, searching for validation, searching for something that's going to make you feel fully confident to take action. And finding that sweet spot on the dial is where you can really have best of both worlds, my personal opinion. But yeah, as far as also playing off what Francois said, anyone can buy rentals that lose money. Anyone can go out and buy a property. To buy a property and run it profitably over a long period of time is a totally different skill set. And so yeah, having good systems, paying attention to your expenses, and like actually auditing your own business. And I call it a business, even though I know most people would rather me call it a passive income stream. I'm pretty averse to the term passive because I think it's misrepresentative. Unless you've completely scaled yourself out of your business, it is still a business that you have to pay attention to. And so a lot of what we teach is just, how do you install systems along the way, even if you only have one property, so that you're building your system for 10 properties when you only have one. And then as you approach these milestones of scaling, you can keep doing it in a way where your systems aren't going to break. Like you're building ahead of where you are so that again, you can still manage it within your lifestyle that you want to live and not have your systems break every time you buy a new property. Yeah, that is a focus, right? Is profitability and then systems to make sure it doesn't expand and take over other important parts of your life.
Yeah, VT, the big bad beard, says spot on, Aaron. My sentiments exactly. So I think, yeah.
Hey, I really like passive investors. I like buying properties from them after they fail.
Yeah. I think that is I don't want to get too much into it, but one of my friends, he did start buying rentals. And I think he was hoping for it to be very passive. And I think that's why he struggled, because he didn't want to do I don't know if networking is the right way to put it, but just communicating with different people, right? Finding other people in the market he's in or asking questions about certain things. Or he was just basically taking the properties manager's word for things. And I was telling him, hey, man, this doesn't add up or this doesn't make sense. Are you talking to other property managers? Are you talking to other people in your market? And yeah, like he just looked at it as something that he wanted to be very passive, and he ended up having to sell a few, just part of it just to get over the headache, I believe. Let's see here. Yeah, look at you. Let's see. I'm back. Got the bot. Oh, okay. No worries, Hyder. Thanks for stopping by. I know there's a bunch of stuff going on right now. There's like Dion has a live going on. I know School Community has the out of state investing group going on right now. But we are over 50 viewers combined on all platforms. But that's great. Like I said, Lauren's not here. So that's a record, I think, for us to getting to that amount without Lauren on here. But I know, Ned, maybe this is something you can touch on a little bit more because I know you do insurance. But this is let's see, this from on Twitter also, default. Oh, no, not this one. Right, this one. From Jason Calcanis from the All In podcast. He says, imagine paying insurance on your home for 30 years, never using it, then having it canceled 6 months before it burns to the ground. Ooh, yeah.
If your insurance is canceled, you can get new insurance.
Yeah, but I know California is having a tough time. A lot of companies are pulling out. It's even in New Orleans. I think you guys are having some insurance issues, and as far as cost of it. And is it challenging to find insurance in your market?
So State Farm is one of the majors that has recently come back. And just for example, one of my fourplexes, the shout out to Lumberjack Landlord, him and I were talking and he brought up State Farm. I was like, I don't think they're around. And then we figured out that because my quote for renewal this year is $25,000 on my fourplex. My new quote that came back in was $14,000. So that's all to the net. That's all bottom line right there. So that's a big help. But at the same time, I'm not going to get too much into Louisiana specifically. So I work in the industry. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but a lot of times you get what you vote for. And that's just the way it works. If you, for example, keep on putting people in office who try and make it to where whenever there's a claim that the judicial system always sides with the homeowner, then sorry, costs go up for the insurance companies. They're not going to not charge you for it. And then if those laws are so strict and so onerous that insurance companies can't make money, then they're just going to leave. The only way to really fix a problem is to reel in the lawyers and fix the laws and deregulate so insurance companies can come in and try and compete with each other, because you can't regulate the law down. You can't regulate the prices down. You got to get enough companies to come into your area to compete and push the prices down. There's just no other way to do it. And if you scare everybody away, except for one or two of the local guys or big guys, then they can do whatever they want on pricing.
Yeah, we don't want to ruffle any feathers here, but
I'm not naming anyone's.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I think hopefully the sadness or the fires that are going on in California is, like, I think a lot of it very unfortunate, but yeah, a lot of times it's who's in office, right? Who people are voting for and the policies they make. And sometimes there's bad results for bad policies. And yeah, you're not going to be able to prevent fires, but at the same time, there's probably things that could be done with resources and funding and a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but I've heard people say that there's things they can do with forest management that would prevent a lot of that stuff. And I know California tends to have like weird practices where we can't clear the forest of brush over there because we're going to mess with the endangered, I don't know, trumpet frog or whatever it is. And they're like, their water issue they have right now. I remember they voted to not put in a desalination plant off the coast of, I want to say, Los Angeles, because of some issue that it was going to cause with plankton within a 1 mile radius around the desalination plant. So yep. a lot of these, maybe each of those decisions individually didn't cause the issue, but I'm sure if you went and looked at all of the votes that were decided over 20 years that had to do with water or insurance or whatever, they add up. It's compound interest, but with just legal instead.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of it, there's a lot of things that, like I said, we don't know for sure, but there is things they probably could have done. And it's not just like something that happened in the past year, right? It's something that probably was over a 20-year policies that were put in place, and then they just compounded on each other. And let's see, VT was asking where Jack is. Yeah, Jack is pretty popular on this channel. He's the potato hat wearing guy, but Jack is very entertaining. But go check out his channel, because apparently when I put the links in, they're not working. But go check out Jack's business talk. He's doing a lot of cool stuff out there, a lot of shorts. But yeah, you guys, Harrison, Aaron, you guys have any issues with getting insurance, or you guys insurance going up quite a bit this past year?
I'll make one comment on insurance. So I live in Houston, which is pretty close to the Gulf, prone to storms, historically pretty tough market for insurance. We just moved here in August of 2023. We moved into a home where already we felt the insurance was pretty expensive. And then our renewal in 2024 was 40% higher. There's never been a claim on this house. We have reasonably good claims history ourselves. And so that tweet that you showed from Jason, where it talks about basically that you never made a claim, but you're getting punished for the external factors. And ours didn't get canceled, but it did go up through no direct input of our own actions. And so I think the point I would try and make there is we can't really do much about this on an individual level. Yes, like totally hear the point on paying attention to the policies. And in general, I feel like you should vote regardless of what you're voting for, right? Like you should be informed and try and participate in things, especially the things that might impact you. But overall, we have very little control over what happens in the insurance market as a whole. And so I think when you go, part of why I like remote investing is that you can choose to invest where you want based on what you're looking for. And so if avoiding this type of situation and the climate risk and the impact that has on insurance is something you don't want to deal with, there are great markets that have insurance issues, but there are also great markets that don't have those same issues. And so teaching yourself, learning how to pick a market and adapt it to what you're actually looking for, I think is a great skill. And then not trying to get too hung up on things you can't control, because at the end of the day, we're still planning to live in Houston. It still fits our family's phase of life that we're in and the objectives that we have, but we're probably going to get beat over the head a little bit on our insurance renewals, and we just have to accept that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually chose markets that were very consistent with their insurance. I worked in insurance a while ago, and so I was very cognizant of that. And so no raises yet, knock on wood, but I guess in Virginia right now, we're at the no water. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's just, so we have our own problems, but insurance right now, thankfully, isn't one of them.
All right. Well, we're about an hour. I don't mind staying on. I got nothing else going on. If you guys got to bounce, you guys can bounce. But if you guys want to talk about anything else, or
I want to highlight one thing.
go ahead.
I want to highlight one thing Ned said that I thought was really poignant. Right when you start to make progress or get really good at something, if you shift gears and go take on something else and ignore what was working, like that's probably one of the most critical mistakes. Mistake is subjective, but like that could be a turning point in your journey where you choke off something that's working and you go shift towards something that's unproven in your own world. If you do that 3 or 4 times, it's pretty easy for 2, 3, 4 years to go by with a bunch of half-baked ideas that never pan out. So I do think that was a really good point. And when it comes to stuff like trying to squeeze more
3 failed
yield
startups, $250,000 gone to that.
3, he said.
3 startups, $250,000, just set on fire doing that. I had to sell my house, move back in with my parents twice. I didn't sell a house. The second time I was renting. I still had to move back in.
Actually, there was something I was going to say, and I forgot to bring it up, but we were talking about kind of things not being as easy or as hard as they seem. I don't know if you guys ever backed up trailers and things like that, where you're trying to make the trailer go right, so you got to turn left, and you're using your side mirrors. So basically, you can't use your rear view mirror like if you have a big trailer. So you can't overcorrect things. Like once you start seeing in the mirror is when you're going to straighten out. If you make too much corrections, now you're gonna lose the direction the truck's going to go in or the load's going to go in. So I see a lot of that in life investing is you're going to make small corrections. If you start overcorrecting things, now you're going to get yourself in trouble or head in a different direction in a sense. And I think you guys all touched on that too, is just sometimes you're just becoming more efficient at what you're doing instead of just trying to always go bigger, or like Ned touched on the shiny object syndrome. But Hyder I forgot where we were talking about this, but Hyder, I don't know if you guys knew about this. We were talking about some economic data or what the government puts out there, but there's FASB 56 is good enough for investment purposes. So like a lot of times the government, when they put out their information, their economic data, it's not necessarily false or inaccurate. It's just the information they're required to put out there. It only has to be good enough for investment purposes because of global concerns, security reasons. But yeah, I found that very interesting. Hey, my backup trailer is getting some thumbs up. I like that. See, I don't just make up shit out here.
You got more audience response from backing up the trailer story than you did from FASB 56.
No, I found that very interesting because a lot of times we're always like, oh, there's fake information or they're correcting it or they're not. This is false data. But like Hyder brought up, a lot of times it's information good enough or close enough to the truth for investment purposes where they're not really lying to you, but at the same time, it's not maybe the exact data that they're, filtered for national security reasons.
So where my head goes with that is like all of this data that gets published, whether it's from the government or independent research firms, the question I always ask is what impact does that actually have on the decisions I have to make for the business I'm trying to build? And the answer 9 times out of 10 for a lot of that data is nothing. Like it doesn't actually impact what I'm going to do and my overall thesis about building a portfolio of cash flowing rentals that have solid fundamentals without taking on too much leverage. Like a lot of those parameters exist no matter what the external. Maybe if the country was burning down and we were in the middle of a nuclear war, then we'd have bigger problems anyway. So I don't know. I don't mean to skirt around the actual question about the data, but I always apply that lens and try not to get too wrapped up in all these different reports and information that comes out if it's not actually impacting what I'm doing.
Very true.
Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you could take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.